All right, today we are diving deep into the world of oil and gas sustainability. We're going to find out how these massive, kind of abstract ideas about the environment get boiled down into cold, hard numbers, numbers that can actually steer billion-dollar decisions.
So let's start with the big one, right? The question on everyone's mind. How in the world do you actually measure a company's environmental footprint? I mean, really measure it in a way that's not just a bunch of vague promises, but is clear, consistent, and you can trust. Well, the answer, as it turns out, starts with having a shared set of rules.
And for a lot of the financial world, those rules start right here, with something called the SASB standards. You can think of them as a kind of universal translator. They create a common language so that a company in one part of the world is speaking the same dialect of sustainability as a company in another. So what exactly are these things? Well, SASB, that's the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, they've created 77 different playbooks, one for just about every industry you can think of. And that nutritional label analogy on the slide, it's perfect, seriously. Just like you'd glance at a label to see the fat or sugar content, investors use these standards to get a quick, clear look at a company's environmental and social health. Okay, so let's pull back the curtain a little bit. How do these standards actually work? How did they take a huge concept like being green and turn it into data points you can actually stick in a spreadsheet?
At its core, the goal is pretty straightforward. First, the standards give companies a clear guide on exactly what they need to be reporting, no more guesswork. Second, and this is huge, it helps investors connect the dots between those environmental factors and the company's bottom line, things like cash flow or how much it costs them to borrow money. And finally, it makes everything standardized, so you can finally, truly compare Company A to Company B, apples to apples.
Now, let's get specific and focus on one industry, the oil and gas services industry. These aren't necessarily the big names you see on gas stations. Think of them more as the essential contractors, the ones in the trenches actually making the whole operation run.
Yeah, these are the folks who drill the wells, who build the massive equipment, and who provide all the critical support on site. Their environmental impact is incredibly direct, which is exactly why having these very specific metrics for them is so important.
So let's jump into the nitty-gritty, starting with one of the most talked about parts of this whole industry, the chemical footprint of hydraulic fracturing, fracking.
And boom, this is where it all gets very, very real. Look at how precise this is. The standard, which has its own code number and everything, doesn't ask for a fuzzy description. It demands two hard numbers. First, the total volume of fluid they used, and second, the exact percentage of that fluid that's considered hazardous.
Right, that's the key question, isn't it? Hazardous can feel like a pretty subjective word, but in the world of standardized reporting, you can't have subjective. It needs a very specific, universal definition.
And here's that definition. A fluid gets the hazardous label if and only if it meets the criteria of the UN's Globally Harmonized System, or GHS. This is so important because it's not some arbitrary rule made up by one group. It's the international benchmark. It means hazardous in Texas means the same thing as hazardous in Saudi Arabia.
So a company's report might end up looking something just like this, a super clear, simple breakdown. It might show that, hey, we used a massive amount of fluid, but only 2% of it actually met that strict international definition of hazardous. Now, if you're an investor, this isn't just a pie chart. It's a risk indicator. It's a clear signal about how that company is managing its operations.
Okay, so that handles the chemical footprint happening deep underground. But what about the impact you can actually see, right on the surface? Well, the next key metric tackles exactly that. How much land is actually being disturbed?
And again, you can see there's no wiggle room here. The standard is incredibly specific. Companies have to calculate the average area of disturbed land for each one of their well sites, and the unit of measure they have to use is the hectare. So, just to help you picture that, 1 hectare is roughly the size of an international rugby field. It's a way to take an abstract number and make it tangible, to help us visualize the actual physical space we're talking about, from the access roads to the drilling pads themselves.
Now, what's really smart about this metric is that disturbed isn't necessarily a permanent state. The standard actually tracks the whole life cycle of the land. It's counted as disturbed during development and operation, sure, but once the job is done, the equipment is removed, and the land is restored, it comes off the company's books. This creates a really powerful financial incentive for companies to clean up their sites and to do it well.
Okay, so we've looked at two very specific metrics, one for chemicals, one for land. Let's zoom back out.
Why does all this detail, this almost obsessive precision, why does it actually matter in the big picture?
Well, here's the bottom line. This level of standardization, it creates this incredible transparency. It allows investors to genuinely compare companies, to see who's managing their environmental risks well and who might be falling behind. And over time, it drives real competition, not just on who can do the job cheapest, but on who can do it safest and most efficiently.
But, and this is a really crucial but, there's a catch. This quote from the standard itself is really telling. It says that deciding what's material, and that's just corporate speak for what's actually important enough to report, that responsibility rests with the company itself. The standard provides the framework, the rules of the game, but it relies on the companies to play fair and report honestly. And that really leaves us with a final massive question. We now have the tools to measure environmental impact with incredible precision, down to the percentage point and the square meter. So the question isn't really, can we measure it anymore? We can. The real question is, with all this data now in our hands, what does true accountability actually look like? Thanks for tuning in.